It is Sunday evening, August 15th, 1971. Millions of American families are gathered around their television sets. They are waiting to watch Bonanza, the most popular show in the country. But Bonanza never airs. Instead, the screen cuts to the Oval Office. A man with a somber face and slicked back hair stares into the camera. He looks nervous. President Richard Nixon is about to deliver a speech of 2,600 words, but only 18 of them matter. 18 words that will secretly rob you, your parents, and your children. Suspend temporarily. Those two words were the greatest lie in financial history. That temporary suspension has lasted more than 50 years. Before that night, $1 was a claim check for a specific amount of gold. It was a contract. After that night, the dollar became a piece of paper backed by nothing but faith. This is the story of the weekend that broke the world. The story of how a secret meeting at Camp David turned the global economy into a ticking time bomb, and why the money in your pocket is melting away while you sleep. If you ask a Bitcoiner or a gold bug why they are so angry, they will point to this specific date, 1971. They call it the WTF happened in 1971 phenomenon. Look at the data. Before 1971, if you worked harder, you got richer. Productivity and wages grew together. A single income could buy a house, a car, and raise a family. But after Nixon's announcement, the link snapped. Productivity kept going up, but your wages, they flatlined. We entered the age of fiat money, money by decree, money that the government can print to infinity. But to understand how we got trapped in this cycle of inflation and debt, we have to go back. We have to go back to the moment the United States became the king of the world. The year is 1944, and the place is Bretton Woods. World War II was coming to an end. Europe was in ruins. Japan was burning. The old empires, Britain, France, were bankrupt. They had spent all their gold fighting the Nazis. But there was one country that had everything, the United States. By the end of the war, the U.S. held 2/3 of all the monetary gold in the world. 2/3. So 730 delegates from 44 nations gathered at this hotel to decide the future of money. The British wanted a neutral global currency, but the Americans said no. Why use a neutral currency when the U.S. has all the gold? The deal they forced on the world was simple yet brilliant. It was called the Bretton Woods system. Every currency in the world would be pegged to the U.S. dollar, and the U.S. dollar would be pegged to gold at strictly $35 per ounce. The phrase "good as gold" wasn't just a saying, it was the law. For 2 decades, this system created the greatest economic boom in human history. The dollar was king. If you were a French bank or a Japanese exporter, holding dollars was exactly the same as holding gold, because at any moment you could walk into the U.S. Treasury, hand them $35, and they had to give you 1 ounce of shining yellow metal. But there was a flaw in the system, a fatal flaw that nobody wanted to talk about. The system relied on one thing. The United States had to be honest. The U.S. had to promise not to print more dollars than they had gold in the vault. But politicians are not known for their restraint. In the 1960s, America wanted to have it all. They wanted a massive welfare state at home, Lyndon B. Johnson's Great Society, and they wanted to fight a massive war abroad, in Vietnam. Wars are expensive. Welfare is expensive. Did the U.S. raise taxes to pay for it? Of course not. Raising taxes is political suicide. Instead, they did what every empire eventually does. They printed the money. They printed more claim checks than there was gold. Imagine a parking lot that sells 1,000 tickets but only has 100 parking spots. Everything is fine as long as everyone doesn't try to park at the same time. But in the mid-1960s, someone noticed. Charles de Gaulle, a president of France. He looked at the pile of dollars flooding Europe and realized the Americans are cheating. He famously called it America's exorbitant privilege. So de Gaulle did something legendary. He didn't just complain, he sent the French Navy across the Atlantic to New York Harbor. His demand was simple. Here are your paper dollars. We don't want them. Give us our gold. The run on the bank had begun, and the United States was bleeding to death. By 1971, the secret was out. The United States had printed far more paper dollars than it had gold to back them up. The parking lot was full, but they kept selling tickets, and after France took their gold, the sharks began to circle. Switzerland, Germany, Belgium, they all started redeeming dollars for gold. The U.S. gold reserves, stored deep within Fort Knox and the New York Federal Reserve, were draining away at a terrifying speed. But the final blow didn't come from an enemy. It came from America's closest ally. On the morning of August 13th, the British ambassador showed up at the Treasury Department. The British wanted to redeem $3 billion worth of gold. That was it. That was the tipping point. If the U.S. paid Britain, there would be nothing left for anyone else. The vault would be empty. Paul Volcker, then the Undersecretary of the Treasury, looked at the numbers. He realized the game was over. They had two choices. One, raise interest rates, stop printing money, and cause a massive recession to save the dollar's value. Or two, change the rules of the game entirely. President Nixon faced an election in 1972. He didn't care about economic theory. He cared about winning. He wasn't going to let a recession destroy his campaign. So he chose option 2, the nuclear option. That same Friday afternoon, Nixon secretly summoned his top 15 advisors to Camp David. The cover story was a budget review. The reality was a financial coup. Total secrecy was ordered. Phone lines were cut. No press, no leaks. Even the Secretary of State wasn't invited. Inside the lodge, a battle raged for 48 hours. On one side was Arthur Burns, the head of the Fed, pleading to save the gold standard. He warned Nixon that breaking the promise of gold would destroy America's reputation forever. But Treasury Secretary John Connally, the politician, bullied everyone into submission. His argument was simple. We are going to screw them before they screw us. By Sunday morning, the decision was made. They drafted a speech that would change the world economy in 18 minutes. Sunday, 9 p.m., Nixon went on live television. He didn't apologize. He didn't admit bankruptcy. Instead, he spun it as a victory against foreign speculators. He used the word temporarily. It was a lie. With those words, the Bretton Woods Agreement was dead. The dollar was no longer a check for gold. It was now a fiat currency, backed by nothing but the government's word. The next morning, the stock market didn't crash, it soared. Why? Because Wall Street loves easy money. But for the average saver, the nightmare had just begun. Nixon promised the suspension was temporary. He promised it would stabilize the dollar. He lied. Once the anchor to gold was cut, the printing presses didn't just run, they sprinted. The 1970s became a decade of economic nightmares. It was called the Great Inflation. The dollar lost half its purchasing power in a single decade. Americans who had saved their whole lives in cash watched their wealth evaporate, not by theft, but by policy. And gold, the barbarous relic that economists laughed at, it took its revenge. In 1971, 1 ounce of gold cost $35. By 1980, it hit $850. The market was screaming a truth that politicians tried to hide. Gold wasn't going up, the dollar was crashing down.
Fast forward to today. We are still living in the world Nixon created on that secret Sunday. Look at this chart. Before 1971, when workers produced more, they got paid more. After 1971, productivity went up, but wages flatlined. Why does it feel like you work harder than your parents but can afford less? Why does a house cost 10 times your annual salary instead of 3? Because money is no longer a store of value, it's a melting ice cube. August 15, 1971 wasn't just a policy change, it was a default. The day the government decided that money isn't something you own, it's something they rent to you and devalue at will. The gold standard is dead. But the question remains, if your money isn't backed by gold, what exactly is it backed by? Think about it.